I almost didn't go downstairs that night. My hip had been bothering me since Tuesday, and the stairs in that house creak in a way that announces every step like a butler with no sense of discretion. It was nearly 11. Everyone was supposed to be asleep. I had every reason to stay in my bed with the lamp off and the ceiling fan running the way I like it, slow and quiet. But I was thirsty. And I had left my water glass in the kitchen after dinner, and sometimes the smallest decisions are the ones that change everything. If I had stayed upstairs that night, I would have walked my son down the aisle of his own destruction with a smile on my face and a gift wrapped in silver paper. I would have handed him over because I didn't know, and not knowing would have cost him everything I spent 31 years building. My name is Caroline Marsh. I am 64 years old. I built a small logistics company from a folding table in my garage after my husband passed, and I grew it into something real. Something that took sacrifice and discipline, and the kind of sleep deprivation that leaves permanent marks around your eyes. I am not rich the way people on television are rich, but I am comfortable, and I am careful, and I have spent my entire adult life making sure that comfort would still be there when my knees gave out. My son is the only child I have. He is 38, kind the way gentle people are kind, which means thoroughly and sometimes at his own expense. He calls me every Sunday without being asked. He mows my lawn when he visits without being asked. He is the sort of man who learns how people take their coffee and never forgets. I raised him to be that way on purpose because I watched his father love the world with open hands, and I thought there was nothing more worth passing down. When he told me he was getting married, I was sitting in my kitchen with a mug of chamomile, and the happiness I felt was the clean kind, not the performed kind, not the polite kind. I put the mug down and hugged him longer than I usually allow myself to, and I meant every second of it. His fiancée had been in his life for 2 years by then. She smiled easily and spoke warmly and always offered to help clear the table after dinner. She remembered my birthday without a reminder the first year, which I thought said something good about her character. She had a way of touching my son's arm when she talked to him that looked like tenderness. I wanted it to be tenderness. I was watching for it the way you watch for signs of rain, hoping to be right. His wedding was set for the last Saturday in April. The venue was a restored farmhouse 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place with white string lights and exposed beams and a field that glowed gold in the evening. I had helped choose it. I remember standing in that field with him on the walkthrough, watching the light change, thinking I had done something right. The weekend before the wedding, his fiancée and I stayed at a house in the same town, her idea, which I thought was generous. She said she wanted us to have time together before everything got busy. She said she wanted to feel like we were real family. I believed her, the way you believe a sunny forecast when you have already made plans. I went to bed early that Friday night. My hip, the stairs, the quiet, all the reasons I had to stay put, and yet I didn't. The kitchen light was already on when I reached the bottom step. I heard her voice before I saw her. She was standing near the back door, with it cracked open slightly, one hand wrapped around her own mug, phone pressed to her ear. Her back was to me. She was speaking low but not whispering, the way people speak when they believe everyone else is unconscious. I stopped at the edge of the hallway. The tile was cold under my bare feet. She was laughing softly at something the person on the other end had said. Not the laugh she used at dinner. This one was unguarded, looser. The laugh of someone who has stepped off stage. I know, she said. I know it seems fast, but honestly, once the papers are signed, it changes everything. Her voice dropped a fraction but stayed clear enough. He doesn't push back. That's the thing about him. He trusts me completely. She paused, listening. Then, I'm not asking for anything dramatic. Just gradually. Once we're married and I'm on the accounts, it's not like she can do anything about it. She's getting older. He'll listen to me before he listens to her eventually. I did not move. My hand was flat against the wall beside me and I kept it there because I needed something to be solid. She laughed again. You think I did all of this for love? She said it lightly, like it was an obvious thing, like the question itself was almost funny. Look, I care about him. I'm not a monster. But his mother built something, and he is the only heir. That's just math. I'm good at math. The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear, and she responded, Exactly. She'll be fine. She's healthy. She'll have her house and her routine and her little garden. I'm not trying to leave her with nothing. I'm just trying to make sure that when the time comes, everything goes the right direction." She paused again. The right direction being us, obviously. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a long time, but I know it wasn't. The brain works faster than the clock when it is receiving information it does not want. I cataloged what I had just heard the way I used to catalog inventory discrepancies at the company, line by line, without letting the feeling arrive before the fact was recorded. She had said my son trusted her. She had said once she was on the accounts. She had said he will listen to me before he listens to her eventually. She had said I'm good at math. I turned around and walked back upstairs without getting my water glass. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. The ceiling fan turned slowly. My hip ached. Outside, the field behind the rental house was perfectly still, the way places get right before something changes in them for good. I know my son. I know him the way you know a piece of music you have heard 10,000 times, not just the melody but the silence between the notes. He gives and rearranges himself to fit the shape of what the people around him need, and he calls it love because no one ever told him that love is not supposed to cost you your outline. His father was the same. I watched his father shrink himself cheerfully for 30 years in ways that only I could see. I also know what it looks like when someone has studied my son, when someone has learned the entry points. He hates conflict, the way some people hate the dentist. He will do almost anything to avoid it, including things he should not do, including signing things he should not sign, including calling it partnership when it is something else. I thought about the last year. Small things that I had translated into charitable explanations because I wanted to be a fair woman and a generous mother-in-law. The way she had, very gently, begun inserting herself into conversations about the business. Not aggressively, nothing she did was aggressive. It was always soft, always phrased as interest. I would love to learn more about how it works. I think it is so impressive what you have built. She asked questions that sounded like admiration, and maybe they were. But sitting in the dark that night, the questions rearranged themselves into a different shape. The way she had mentioned, twice in the last few months, that it must be exhausting managing everything alone, that I deserved to rest, that my son worried about me carrying so much. He had never told me he worried about that. When I asked him later, he looked mildly confused and said she probably just meant she cared. Probably. I lay back on the bed with my hands folded on my stomach, and I stared at the ceiling until the room got lighter. And then I made the same decision I always make when something threatens what I love. I did not panic. I organized. The wedding was 6 days away. I did not tell my son the next morning. I want to be honest about that, and about why. It was not because I doubted what I had heard. My hearing is fine. I have worn glasses since I was 42, but my ears have never failed me. I didn't tell him because my son would have gone to her immediately. He would have wanted to fix it the way he wants to fix everything, by bringing everyone to the same table and talking it through until it feels resolved. And she would have cried, and she would have been sorry, and she would have explained it in a way that left him feeling like the conversation had never happened. I have watched him absorb explanations his whole life. He is too good at it. I needed something she could not explain away. I spent that day being pleasant. I am good at pleasant. I have sat in rooms with difficult vendors and stubborn banks and people who wanted to take things from me my whole career, and I have learned that a calm face is a better weapon than a raised voice in almost every situation. I smiled at breakfast. I said her name warmly when I passed her in the hallway. I watched her from the corner of my eye the way you watch a weather system developing on the horizon. She gave me nothing different. She was good. I will give her that. She was very good. On the third day, I drove into town on a reason I invented about picking up alterations, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of a dry cleaner's and called my attorney. I explained the situation in plain terms. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Tell me what you need." I told him. 2 days before the wedding, I had what I needed. Documents reviewed, arrangements adjusted, certain structures put quietly in place. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would rearrange my son's life without his knowledge in any permanent way. Just protections. Doors that I was choosing not to leave open. I am not describing this as cleverness. I am describing it as the thing a parent does when they have been building something for 30 years and they refuse to let it be walked out of without a witness. The night before the wedding, we had a rehearsal dinner at a restaurant the bride's family had chosen. Round tables, good wine, the kind of low lighting that makes everyone look kinder than they are. I sat across from her and watched her hold my son's hand and laugh at the right moments and accept compliments with that particular graceful deflection that looks like humility but is actually performance. And I thought, you practiced this. You practiced all of this. My son caught my eye once across the table and smiled at me, the way he has smiled at me his whole life, open and safe, like I am the place where things are okay. I returned the smile. I held it, because that smile was the reason I had gotten out of bed in the dark. That smile was what I was protecting. She gave a small speech after dessert. She talked about my son's kindness. She talked about how she had never felt so chosen. She looked at me at one point and said that gaining a mother-in-law like me was something she did not take lightly. Her eyes were soft and sincere, and I thought about the phone pressed to her ear in the dark kitchen and the looseness of that unguarded laugh. I thanked her. I kept my voice warm. I did not let my face show a single crack. That night in my hotel room, I took out my phone and I played back what I had recorded 3 days earlier. Standing in the hallway of that rental house with my hand flat against the wall and my feet cold against the tile, I had made a decision in about 4 seconds. My phone was in the pocket of my robe because I carry it everywhere out of habit, which is something my son has teased me about for years. I had opened the voice memo app and pressed record before my brain had finished processing what my ears had already understood. The recording was not perfect. There was ambient noise, and one section was harder to make out than the others, but the important parts were there. Her voice, unhurried and clear. His mother built something, and he is the only heir. That's just math. Once I'm on the accounts, it's not like she can do anything about it. I'm good at math. I pressed stop and set my phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling of a hotel room that smelled like industrial lavender and tried to feel something other than the specific sadness of being right about something you desperately wanted to be wrong about. I thought about my son's face at that dinner table, the open smile, the trust that came off him like heat from a lamp. I thought about how he was, at this moment, 2 floors above me in the same building, sleeping without knowing, dreaming whatever people dream the night before they intend to make a promise that is supposed to be permanent. I made a decision that I have made more than once in my life, in offices and boardrooms and quiet rooms that smelled like illness and grief. I decided to feel it in full and then set it down, because the feeling was a distraction and tomorrow required my whole mind. The farmhouse the next afternoon was everything the photographs had promised, golden and soft and strung with light. Guests arrived in their good clothes and stood in the field and took pictures against the wood fence and said it was beautiful because it was. I wore a blue dress my son had helped me choose, and I kept my spine straight and my expression easy, and I kissed cheeks and shook hands and answered questions about how I was feeling about gaining a daughter. Wonderful, I told people. I am just so happy for them. She was in the bridal suite, with her mother and her 2 sisters, and a woman who did hair. I went in to see her an hour before the ceremony, which was expected of me. She looked lovely. She looked the way she was supposed to look, radiant and slightly trembling with a happiness that read as genuine from every angle but one. She held both my hands when I walked in and said she was so glad I was there. Her eyes were full. I squeezed her hands and told her she was beautiful. Then I said, gently, like a woman making small talk, "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about how important family is to you." She blinked. The tiniest hesitation. Smiled. I nodded. I held her gaze 1 beat longer than comfortable. Then I smiled and excused myself and walked out into the hallway where the caterers were moving fast and the florist was adjusting something near the entrance, and nobody was paying attention to a 64-year-old woman in a blue dress walking toward the guest seating with her, phone in her hand. I found my seat. I folded my hands in my lap. I breathed. My son stood at the front in a gray suit that fit him well, and I could see from where I sat that he was nervous in the best way, the way people are nervous when they are about to do something they have wanted for a long time. His best friend stood beside him and said something that made him laugh and lean forward and shake his head, and I watched him, and I loved him so completely that the next 20 minutes were were the hardest thing I have done in a long while. The ceremony started on time. The music rose, and the guests stood, and I stood with them, and I watched the doors at the back of the field open. She appeared on her father's arm looking like every promise she had ever made, and the guests made the sound that guests make, that collective exhale of collective beauty, and my son's face, when he saw her, was the face of a man who believed everything, and I let him have that for the length of the aisle. When her father placed her hand in my son's hand and stepped back, and when the officiant began and the guests settled, and the afternoon went still and golden around us, I stood up, not dramatically. I did not bang a pew or raise my voice. I simply rose from my seat in the front row, the way a woman rises when she has something that must be said before a door swings shut on a room that cannot be reopened. The movement alone stopped the officiant mid-sentence. My son turned. His face cycled through confusion, then concern, then the particular expression children have when their parent does something unexpected in public. He said my name quietly, like a question. I looked at him for one full second before I spoke. I wanted him to see that I was steady, that this was not panic, that what was coming was something I had carried carefully for 6 days because I loved him too much to hand it to him without both hands. Then I looked at her. "I overheard a phone call," I said. My voice was the same voice I use in board meetings, even, direct. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was thirsty, but I heard enough. The guests went very quiet, the kind of quiet that has texture. Her face shifted so fast, and then went still. She was good, as I said. She was very good. She said my name with a question in it, with gentle confusion arranged around it like a frame, and she reached out her hand slightly as if she might touch my arm. I didn't let her touch my arm. "I heard you tell someone that my son trusts you completely," I continued, "that once you were on the accounts, there was nothing I could do about it. That you were, and I am repeating this accurately, good at math." A sound moved through the guests, not a gasp, more like a shift in air pressure. My son had gone very still, his best friend beside him had taken one small step back, as if to give the moment room. She tried to speak. I want to say she tried to deny it, but what she actually did was more skilled than denial. She looked at me with something wounded and said, "I don't understand what you think you heard." That phrase, "what you think you heard," is designed to make a woman doubt her own ears. I have heard it before. I have heard it in conference rooms from men who underestimated me, and I have heard it from vendors who hoped I had not read the small print. It has never worked. I took out my phone. I found the file. I pressed play. Her voice came out of the small speaker and into the golden afternoon air of that farmhouse field, and it was her voice, unhurried and clear and belonging entirely to the dark kitchen 3 nights ago, and every syllable arrived exactly as I had remembered it. His mother built something and he is the only heir. That's just math. The sound that came from the guests this time was different. This one had an edge. She shook her head. Her composure was cracking at the hinges, but she was still holding the frame. "That's out of context," she said quickly. "You don't understand. It was a private moment. I was venting. I was stressed. That is not what I meant." She looked at my son. She put her hand on his arm. "Honey, I love you. You know I love you." My son looked at her hand on his arm, and then he looked at me, and his face was the face of a man doing arithmetic he does not want the answer to. She turned to the guests, trying to reclaim the room. "We all say things when we're stressed," she said, voice lifting. "You all know how it is, how planning something this big can make you." I played it again. Not to be cruel, not for the sound of it. I played it again because I needed the room to have heard it twice before she could build a story around it once. The second time, people leaned in. The woman 2 rows behind me covered her mouth. A man in a gray blazer on the groom's side shook his head slowly. Her sister, standing in the front row, looked at the ground. My son had not moved. She dropped the wounded look then. It happened quickly, the way a face changes when it understands that the audience is gone. Her expression went flat and then sharp, and then she said, quietly but clearly enough, "You have no right to invade my privacy." I looked at her the way I look at people who have confused my restraint for something they can use. "You had no right to plan what you planned," I said. "Those are different conversations." She made a sound that was meant to be disbelief but came out closer to frustration. She looked at my son again, and this time the look was different. It was a calculation. It was checking the odds. My son looked back at her for a long moment. Then he said her name the way you say someone's name when you are setting it down somewhere. He said, "I need you to tell me that isn't what that sounds like." She opened her mouth, closed it. He waited, and in that silence, the answer was delivered without a single word. My son took one slow step back, not dramatic, not a shove or a speech, just a step, the kind that means a man has understood something and is giving himself room to hold it. She reached for him. He didn't move toward her hand. The officiant had stopped speaking some time ago. He stood at the front with his hands clasped, and his expression the careful neutral of a man trained not to take sides in other people's storms. I looked at my son and I said, "I had our attorney review every account and arrangement this week. Everything is protected. Whatever she was planning, there is nothing to take." She made a sound like the air had been pushed out of her. I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because my son needed to know that the floor was still solid, that I had not let this get ahead of me, that the thing she thought she could access like a door left unlocked had already been closed quietly and professionally days ago. I needed him to know that whatever grief he was about to feel was not accompanied by ruin. The guests began to move then. The way they had been still before was replaced by the restless energy of people who have witnessed something and don't yet know what to do with their hands. Whispers ran in low currents through the rows. Her mother stepped forward from the family side of the aisle, face pale, and tried to reach her daughter's arm. Her father stood rigid in his suit, looking at a middle distance. Her best friend, the one who had stood beside her through the rehearsal and the getting ready morning, turned to the woman beside her and said something too quietly to hear. But I saw her take a small step to the side, away. My son's best friend, to his credit, said nothing. He simply moved to stand beside my son, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and he stayed there. She looked around at the room, at the faces, and I watched the moment she understood that a crowd is not the same as an audience. An audience is with you. A crowd is made of individuals, and individuals make individual judgments. She had been performing for an audience, and the performance had been very good, and then the recording had played twice, and the audience had become a crowd, and the crowd had turned. She looked at me one last time with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not wounded, not calculated, not warm. It was raw. The face beneath the face. And what she said was quiet enough that only I and my son and the people in the first 2 rows could hear it. "You always hated me." I had genuinely tried not to hate her. I want that to be part of this story too, because it is true. I had wanted her to be what my son believed she was. I had wanted the cleared table and the remembered birthdays and the arm touch to be real. I had been watching for rain and hoping for sun. "No," I said, and I kept my voice even because she deserved at least that. "I never hated you. I just heard you." The wedding did not happen. There was no dramatic ending to the afternoon. There was no shouting, no thrown flowers, no one fainted. She walked back through the farmhouse with her mother and her sisters, and she did not stop when my son said her name once more, softly, the way you say something when you are not sure you want an answer. She did not look back. The guests filtered out in that quiet, stunned way that happens when something has ended that was supposed to begin. Some people stopped to touch my arm. Some people said nothing and just looked at me, and then at my son, with an expression that meant they understood something without being able to name it yet. The caterers stood near the entrance, unsure of their instructions. The florist had gone still. My son came and stood beside me in the field as the last of the guests reached their cars. The string lights were starting to matter as the afternoon faded, doing exactly what they were designed to do, making everything look softer and warmer than it had a right to be. He didn't say anything for a while. Neither did I. Then he said, "How long did you know?" 6 days, I told him. He was quiet with that. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you would have gone to her," I said, "and she would have made you believe it was something I had misunderstood." He was quiet again. I could feel him working through it, the way he has always worked through hard things, carefully and in his own time, refusing to arrive at a conclusion before he was ready. He said, "She looked at me like she loved me." "I know," I said. He swallowed. "Maybe she did, in her way. That's possible," I told him. And it doesn't change what else was also true. He nodded slowly. The light was gold on his gray suit, and he looked very much like his father for a moment, and I had to be careful with that. He didn't cry there in the field. He would cry later, privately, the way he does everything emotional away from everyone but me. He would call me from wherever he ended up that night, and his voice would be raw and thin, and we would stay on the phone for a long time without either of us saying very much, and that would be enough. But in the field, he just stood beside me and watched the string lights come into their own as the sky darkened, and after a while he put his arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, and we stayed like that for a while. The weeks after were not simple. They never are when something you have built toward for years comes apart all at once. He mourned her the way you mourn a version of reality, not just a person, but an entire imagined future, the house you had already decorated in your head, the mornings you had already rehearsed. Grief doesn't care how right you were. It arrives on its own terms. I did not tell him how to feel. I did not remind him of the recording, or revisit the details, or offer the kind of comfort that is really just thinly dressed vindication. I let him be sad. I answered the phone at odd hours. I kept the chamomile tea stocked in my cabinet for when he stopped by. He took his time. That's who he is. About a month later, on a Sunday, he called me the way he always calls, routine and steady and right on schedule, and we talked about ordinary things for a while. The weather, a show he was watching, a problem at work he had figured out. Before he hung up, he said, quietly, "Mom, you saved me." I told him that was too large a thing to put on one phone call. He laughed a little, the real laugh, not the one he uses when he is trying to be okay, but the one that sounds like himself. I have thought about what I would say if someone asked me whether I felt guilty about how it happened. Standing up in a field full of people who had driven an hour to witness something beautiful in the middle of a ceremony and ending it before it began. Whether I felt guilty about the caterers with nowhere to put the food, or the florist with a van full of arrangements, or her father in his suit looking at nothing, I would tell them that the guilt I carry has a different shape. The guilt I carry is for the 2 years before that field. For every dinner where I translated her sharpness into nervousness, her questions into curiosity, her performance into affection. For every time I said probably and pushed the discomfort down because I wanted to be a fair woman and I didn't want to be the mother-in-law from the bad story. I should have trusted my instincts earlier. That's where the weight sits. But I would also tell them this. I did not ruin anything in that field that was real. I interrupted something that was designed to look like a life while quietly being something else. There is a difference between a wedding and a trap, even when they look identical from the outside. My son is okay. He is more than okay. He is careful now in ways he wasn't before, not guarded, not closed, just awake in a way that cost him something to learn. He asks different questions. He notices different things. He told me recently that he has started paying attention to what people say when they think no one is listening, and I told him that was one of the most useful skills a person could develop. I told him his father had it too. I still wake up sometimes in the early hours when the house is quiet, and I think about that kitchen. The cracked back door, the cold tile, her voice with all the performance stripped out of it, easy and unguarded and absolutely certain that she was alone. I think about how close I came to staying in my bed. And then I think about my son's face in that field, the gold light and the gray suit, his arm around my shoulders and both of us watching the string lights do what they were made to do. That is the ending I would choose every time. Not the scene in the aisle, not the recording played twice for a crowd of witnesses, not the way her face changed when she understood the audience was gone. Just the field, afterward, just the quiet, just my son beside me, whole and protected, standing on ground I had made sure was still solid before I ever let him feel it shake.